my next guest. He is Matchmaker Eric Bottjer joining me here as we are here for Boxing Insider Promotions. Of course, 5 New Jersey fighters on the card tonight. Eric, how you doing today?
I'm feeling pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing good. So, for you, talk about, for those who might not know, what exactly is a matchmaker and what is your role in the grand scheme of things?
So it's that as it literally sounds. I put together the matches on the show. So Larry Goldberg, the promoter, wants. He's got a few fighters that I know are going to be on the show, so that I have to match them. And then there'll be a few other fights where we just start organically and find fighters on both ends and match them up. So I negotiate the fights, how many rounds, what's the maximum weight, and of course the important part, how much are they getting paid?
Right. Because that's always the more important question for the majority of people, right?
Yep.
It's not even who they're even fighting some of these times.
Yeah, there's always problems with matchmaking, and most of the problems, like anything else in life, are solved by money.
Right. So for you, putting together a fight card like tonight obviously is unique because you have so many local fighters to the area. A lot of times, people go to an event in a different city. There's not a lot of people from that area look at professional sports. Like almost nobody on the Eagles is from Philadelphia, right? So how unique is it for you and what you do to say, hey, we're putting 5 New Jersey fighters on a fight card on one night?
Yeah, I mean, there's so few fighters compared to how it used to be, and I don't mean to sound like an old dinosaur, but I am. 20, 30 years ago, the number of fighters was double. Maybe even close to triple 10 years ago. There's not a lot of product out there to begin with, and of course, in any era, fighters are leery about fighting each other from close by neighborhoods because it's a matter of pride, and nobody wants to go back to that neighborhood a loser.
Right.
So if we have 5 New Jersey fighters, which is a good point about this show, you still have more fighters on the show that are not from New Jersey, and that didn't used to be so. So right now, 5 is a good number. It's to have a show where there's 5 what's considered local boxers on one professional show. That's tough to do.
Yeah, 5 boxers who also live and train within an hour of Atlantic City is also the cool element of that. Again, tonight, Boxing Insider Promotions, Tropicana Showroom in Atlantic City. Tickets still on sale, Ticketmaster.com, and the Tropicana Showroom box office opens after 4 p.m. It's funny you mentioned about, people who know each other. 2 of the fighters on this card, Justin Figueroa and Josh Popper, they're both Holy Spirit High School graduates. And, Justin has kind of joked to me in the past about how, he'll go like, hey, it's a good thing, Popper's in a completely different weight class because I don't, I wouldn't want to fight like a fellow, graduate of my high school. So that kind of like reminded me of what you were saying about people saying, I don't want to, compete with somebody from the same neighborhood, or in this case, from the same, school lineage.
Yeah, it doesn't. It sometimes doesn't even matter if they're friends or not, because the friends can be the excuse,
right?
And they happen to be from the neighborhood, but hey, we're friends and we would never fight, and I hear that. And then sometimes it's the opposite, where there's such a sort of a deep-seated dislike for the other side just because of territorialness that they can't put it in their mind, hey, I should take this fight, even because the fear of losing overcomes their hatred for the other guy and wanting to bash them. And more often than not, those fights just don't get made.
I know that it's hard to say who your favorite child is if I ask this question, but is there a match tonight that you are most looking forward to?
What's great about these shows, and this is a tribute to Larry Goldberg, the promoter. He allows me to make fights that are competitive. There's a lot of shows around that you look at the card before you walk in, before the first fight gets into the ring, who's going to win those fights. That's not true here.
Also, really quick, you also know when you can go up and go to the bathroom, or go up and get something to drink.
So tonight.
When you think about the New Jersey fighters as well, a lot of them, pretty much all of them are either undefeated or only have 1 loss on their resume. does that create a dynamic in matchmaking that makes it either easier or more difficult?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it depends on the fighter and how advanced the fighter is and how talented the fighter is. So there could be two 10-0 fighters from New Jersey, but one of them will be vastly different from the other. Let's take the more talented one who has maybe more amateur experience. Um, that fighter can quickly step up the competition without fear of getting beaten because it's all about these guys want to rise to a certain level without a loss and then take really competitive fights for a lot of money. So that journey, if the guy is better and the guy has more amateur experience, its journey's a little easier because he's going to have more money invested in him and his talent will overcome, whatever opposition he faces. Whereas the marginally talented guy, if he's not like a ticket seller and so he's not very important to the show, you know, he's going to be thrown in 50-50 fights before this big money. That's just the way it is.
Now, you mentioned about amateur experience. So, just to use a specific fighter for an example, Leah Lewandowski has a very unique background. Her whole story is absolutely wild in the fact that the majority of her amateur experience came surrounding the Olympic trials. So, how does someone like that, with not like the traditional, I have, 20, 30 amateur fights, but then her being part of Olympic trials, like, how does that change the dynamic of saying, I have someone with X amount of experience?
So for women's boxing is where men's boxing was 100 years ago. So and that being the amateur part of that is there's not a lot of girls that are turning professional now, as is well back in those days where they were literally starting women's boxing. So there wasn't a huge amateur background for these women.
Right.
I think the next generation, that's going to be different. I think the next generation, women, especially in this country, the term pro, will have significant number of amateur fights, 30, 40, 50 amateur fights. But most of the women turning pro, they're not like Clarissa Shields, who had, I think, 77 amateur fights. She was an exception. That will become, part of the routine program, but that's a decade from now. So like with Leah's case, she'll be fighting girls that have more amateur experience or far less amateur experience. It's just random. But these girls reach a certain level pretty quickly when they turn pro. So there's not a lot of mismatches there.
Well, I'll also say that, not to go too down the rabbit hole, but one of the other issues for women combat sports is that you have so much crossover now. So you have some women, they start in boxing, they go to MMA, or they start in MMA and they go to boxing. And I'm sure, that creates some sort of weird conversations where you have someone in my mind, I go to Holly Holm, right?
Yeah.
Someone who won multiple belts in women's boxing and then goes to women's MMA. And I remember there was a whole fiasco when she ended up fighting Ronda Rousey because she had very few MMA fights, and certain commissions would not, sign off on them fighting because Ronda had exponentially more MMA experience. So, in the women's combat world, you could say there's a lot of weird. I want to say weird, but a lot of, shall I say, challenges, right, when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that fight up. That's the only MMA show I ever watched because I think at that point Ronda Rousey was on the cover of Ring magazine, which is a boxing magazine, and she had not had a boxing fight yet. So there was all of a sudden this hype about her being a boxer. Holly Holm, everyone in the boxing world knew, had professional boxing experience, was an actual boxing world champion. So this match intrigued us, and we watched. And I remember watching it with a friend of mine. About 40 seconds into the fight, I turned to my friend. I'm like, "This girl can't fight." Meaning Ronda Rousey. I'm like, she doesn't even know what to do with her feet here.
Yes.
So I was shocked that she was supposedly a superior combat sports, women's athlete because, at least in the boxing sense, she did everything wrong.
Correct. And that was really, in terms of MMA, because I cover MMA as well, that was like the warning when Holly Holm knocked out Ronda. And by the way, she knocked her with a kick as well. Let's throw that in. So that's not even Holly's main expertise. She's a boxer, and it was a warning sign to the rest of women's MMA because you could argue from that point on, women's MMA has become much more refined in terms of striking. Whereas now, if you can't be a Ronda Rousey in today's world, you can't be someone who just comes from judo in. It's kind of like what men's MMA went through 20 some years ago, where you had, your wrestlers, your boxers, and everybody coming together. And over time, they realized, nah, you actually have to learn other things. You can't just come into with one thing. And I think the same thing goes for boxing, right? You can't just be a one-dimensional fighter.
Yeah, that's a great point because that's the evolution of MMA, what you just described. So women's boxing is going through its own evolution. They're just 100 years behind men. They're 100 years just behind as far as this, basically this is, later in their gene pool than it has been for men. So they are, girls like women like Clarissa Shields and Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano, they will be remembered 100 years from now, like, we remember male boxers like, Jack Dempsey and Jack Johnson. These are just pioneers.
Gotcha.
These are, these women are pioneers now, but this is where they are as a whole.
Well, that's a very interesting analogy because you're looking at someone like Jack Johnson and Jack Dempsey, their style of fighting would be wrecked by people 50 years, 60 years later.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, so correct me. Eric Bottjer joining us here. He is a matchmaker with Boxing Insider Promotions and with other boxing events. You're saying that basically women's boxing is going to has a chance to evolve to a point where it's going to make a Clarissa Shields, just to use her as an example, almost look like she doesn't belong, maybe potentially years.
Yeah, no, 100 years from now, I'm sure, because the film now of everything will exist 100 years from now. They're going to look at Clarissa Shields and say, literally, that girl could fight. Like, she was considered good. Like, it'll just be a bafflement to them. It's just evolution. I mean,
Right.
I remember there was a story about Jim Thorpe. There's a book about Jim Thorpe that just came out, a documentary. So, fact is, Jim Thorpe, if you put him in the state of Oregon women's 100-meter dash, he would not place in the top 10 in high school right now. It's just evolution. People, men and women just get bigger, faster, stronger.
Well, so it's the training too. You know more
nutrition and training.
Like the story, the Larry Bird story. For those who don't know, Larry Bird, the reason why his NBA career was ended early was because he sustained a back injury while putting his mother's driveway in for her himself. In today's world, first of all, you paid somebody. These pro athletes today would pay someone to pave their mom's driveway. And two, with modern medicine and rehabilitation, Larry probably could have handled the back injury better than laying on the floor at the 92 Olympics on a foam roller hoping for the best.
Yeah, no, everything overall gets better, now AI is involved in this now, and AI can look at a problem and just literally spit out at least the statistical correct, answer that people are looking for if they're going to, however weight they put on statistics.
Eric, before we let you go, and I appreciate you jumping on this. This is a ton of fun, this conversation. Obviously the main event tonight, Justin Figueroa, Mr. Atlantic City, Holy Spirit High School graduate, Lacey lifeguard. He's got all the superlatives around him, but he's also undefeated. He's 14-0. What for you, as someone who's a matchmaker, is unique about him?
So he's at a point where a lot of boxers get, where at this point, every fight he has, including tonight, he's going to be in danger because he's fighting at a level where even if he's better than the other guy is good enough to put him in danger. And if he puts him in danger, then, Justin could lose the fight. So these are the types of fights that he's going to be fighting just because of experience, and he's earned his way there. He's earned his way to compete at this higher level. So these are the fun fights to watch in his development for sure, because you don't know where his ceiling is yet. These guys that like he's fighting tonight, it's going to start to reveal what the ceiling is.
Absolutely. Eric Bottjer, of course, he is a matchmaker. He put together this Boxing Insider Promotions card tonight. Tropicana Showroom in Atlantic City. Again, tickets on sale, Ticketmaster.com. Tropicana Showroom box office opens after 4 p.m. Doors open tonight around after 6:30. First fight scheduled for 7:30. Eric, great stuff, man. Appreciate it.
Oh, this was fun. Thank you so much.